"Don't let go, please," she whispered. The cowboy was pulled back to life by the stranger woman. Jake Harding lay in the dust of the canyon floor, blood soaking into the earth beneath him. His body was a broken mess, every movement sending a jolt of pain through his battered muscles. The fight had been too much. He had been outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. The last thing he remembered was the flash of gunfire and the sharp, searing pain in his side. Then everything went black. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and his vision blurred. It was over. The pain was too much. The world around him spun, fading into a haze. It didn't matter anymore. He had fought for years, and now it seemed like all that was left was the cold, empty feeling of defeat. He had tried to protect the ranch, tried to defend his family, but now, they would never know what had happened to him. "Damn," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible. I can't do it." His fingers twitched, but there was no strength left to move. His hand, once strong and calloused, now lay limp in the dirt. He could hear the distant howls of the wind, the echo of birds overhead, but it all felt so far away, so quiet. And then there was nothing. Jake's mind drifted, memories flashing through his mind like a blur. His wife, Emma, her smile that had once brightened the darkest days. His little girl, Lily, with her blonde curls and the way she would tug on his sleeve when she wanted his attention. But they were gone now. They had been taken, and he had been powerless to stop it. There was no sense in going on. The world had turned its back on him, and he had no reason to fight anymore. Just as his vision began to fade completely, a sound reached his ears, a soft, distant voice. At first he thought it was his imagination, a trick of his failing mind, but then the voice grew louder, closer, and suddenly there was a warmth that wrapped around him. "Don't let go, please," the voice whispered. It was a woman's voice, calm and gentle, but filled with an intensity that made Jake's heart race in his chest. He tried to focus, to force his eyes open, but the world was slipping away, and he couldn't hold on to it. His body refused to obey him. "Please," the voice urged again, "don't go." Jake's breath hitched. He didn't know where the voice was coming from, but it was as though the words themselves were giving him strength. Somehow the pain lessened, and his lungs filled with air once again. He didn't feel so cold. His heartbeat began to slow, steadying as if life was creeping back into his veins. With great effort he forced his eyes open, squinting against the blinding sun. Through the haze he saw a figure standing above him. A woman. She was tall, her silhouette framed against the bright blue sky, and she was looking down at him with a strange intensity. Her hair was dark, almost black, and flowed around her face like a wave of shadows. She wore clothing unlike anything Jake had ever seen. No dust-covered denim or worn leather boots. Instead, her clothes seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, a deep green material that seemed to glow faintly. She was carrying something, a strange object that looked like a piece of ancient technology, glowing softly in her hands. Jake's mind struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. Had he finally lost it? Was this some kind of fever dream? Who are you?" he rasped, his voice cracking as he struggled to speak. "Where am I?" The woman bent down beside him, her eyes filled with a calm certainty that Jake couldn't understand. "I'm here to help you," she said softly. "You're not dead yet." Jake blinked, trying to clear his vision, but it was hard to focus. The world around him was spinning again. The shadows closed in, and he could feel the cold creeping back into his bones. "It's too late," Jake whispered. His voice was barely more than a rasp. "I'm done." The woman's hand reached out, and she touched his forehead. Her fingers were warm, gentle, and the moment her skin made contact with his, Jake felt a surge of energy flood through him. It wasn't like anything he had ever experienced before. The pain in his side began to dull, and his body seemed to wake up, as though some hidden force was fighting to keep him alive. "Stay with me," she said again, her voice unwavering. Jake's mind raced. Who was this woman? How had she found him? Why did she care? There was no way she could have known what had happened to him, let alone the fate of his family. He had been alone for days, hiding from the gang that had taken everything from him. He had thought his time was up, but now something was changing. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask her more, but all that came out was a strangled cough. Blood dripped from his lips, and his vision blurred once more. The woman's hand moved from his forehead to his chest, her touch grounding him. "Don't worry," she whispered. "You're not alone." Jake's mind seemed to fight against the healing energy that the woman was giving him. It felt wrong, like something deep inside him was resisting it. He had been through so much already, and the thought of trusting anyone again felt impossible. But something about her presence, her calm demeanor, was unlike anything he had ever known. He didn't want to give in, but he didn't have the strength to fight anymore. As he struggled to stay conscious, he heard the woman speak again, her voice like a lullaby, soft but powerful. "I'm here for you, Jake. You don't have to fight anymore." She knew his name. For the first time since the attack, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for him to survive this, a chance to make things right. With his last bit of strength, he reached out for her hand, his fingers brushing against her warm skin. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake Harding let go of his fears. Jake slowly opened his eyes again, and this time the world around him felt different. The pain in his body had faded to a dull throb, and his senses seemed sharper than they had been in weeks. He was no longer lying in the hot, dusty canyon. Instead, he found himself in a small, dimly lit shelter. The air was cool and smelled faintly of herbs and something unfamiliar, something that reminded him of the faint glow of stars. For a moment, he wondered if he was still alive.
Had he died, and this was the afterlife?
But the warmth that flowed through his body told him otherwise. He was awake, alive, and strangely more alert than he had been in days. The mysterious woman sat by a small fire, her presence calming and serene. She wasn't looking at him, but at the object she had been carrying. The strange glowing device, which now sat next to the fire, casting an eerie light. She appeared to be deep in thought, her brow furrowed as if contemplating something important. Jake struggled to sit up, his muscles stiff but not in the intense pain they had been before. He winced slightly, but his body was healing. It was like something was pulling him back from the brink, mending the damage in ways he couldn't understand. The woman heard him move and turned to look at him, her dark eyes meeting his with an expression of calm assurance. "You're awake," she said, her voice soft yet firm. Jake cleared his throat, still confused. Where am I?" "I healed you," she interrupted gently. "The relic I carry, it has the power to bring you back." Jake looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "But why? Why help me?" Her lips curled slightly in a distant smile, but her eyes remained serious. "'Cause I need your help." Jake's confusion deepened. "My help? I'm just a cowboy lady. What could I possibly do for someone like you?" She leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees. The soft glow of the fire flickered in her dark eyes. "You don't know who I am yet."
"But you will."
She paused, watching him closely. "And you'll understand why I need you." Jake shifted uncomfortably, still not entirely trusting her. But there was something about her that made him want to listen. "I don't get it," he muttered. "You found me out there in the desert?" "Saved me." The woman nodded. "In a way, I did. My name is Maria. I come from a place far from here." She motioned to the device beside her. "This is no ordinary object. It's a relic of my people, and it holds the key to something much greater than you can imagine." Jake blinked, trying to make sense of her words. His mind still felt clouded from the blood loss, but something about the way she spoke made him feel like there was more to the world than what he had known, something much larger and far more dangerous. She continued, "My people, we are scattered across the stars, but we've been hunted, chased by an enemy that wants to control the relic's power. This device, it can heal, it can bring back the dead, but it can also destroy. It's a weapon, and I'm the one carrying it." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but she quickly regained her composure. "I've been on the run, searching for someone strong enough to help me." Jake shifted in the makeshift bed, trying to absorb what she was saying. "A weapon? So you're saying you're on the run from some group that wants to use this thing for evil?" Marion nodded gravely. "Yes. And the reason I saved you, I sensed something in you. A strength. A power. You were dying, but the relic felt your spirit. It reached out and healed you because you might be the key to stopping them." Jake didn't know whether to laugh or run. He wasn't anything special. He was just a man who had been trying to keep a ranch alive, protect his family. Now here he was, with a strange woman, claiming he was the one to help her fight a battle he knew nothing about. "I'm just a cowboy," he muttered again, shaking his head. "I don't even know how to use a relic, whatever that thing is. Why would it pick me?" Maria's eyes softened, but her expression remained firm. "I know this is difficult to understand, but the relic chooses those who need to carry it. You're not just a cowboy, Jake. You're someone who's been through great loss, someone who can fight for what's right. That's why it chose you." Jake glanced at the glowing device on the floor, the mysterious object that had healed him. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the air seemed to hum around it. It felt alive. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt something stir inside him. He didn't know why, but the idea of standing up again, of fighting for something, didn't feel impossible anymore. "Okay," he said finally, looking up at Maria with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. "I'll help you. But I need to know what I'm getting into. What are we up against? Who's hunting you?" Maria's expression darkened, and for a moment the weight of her words seemed to hang in the air. "There are beings, who have been chasing me for a long time. They want the relic for themselves, to control it. But they're not just people. They're something else. Creatures, maybe? I don't know what they are, but they've been following me across planets. They'll stop at nothing to get their hands on this." Jake's brow furrowed.
And they'll come for me too, won't they?
Maria nodded. "Yes. The relic has chosen you, and with that comes great danger. But together, we might stand a chance." A cold shiver ran down Jake's spine. He wasn't sure he believed everything Maria was saying, but there was one thing he knew for sure. She had saved him, and somehow he owed her his life. "All right," he said, sitting up straighter. "So what do we do now?" Maria stood up, moving with purpose as she grabbed the relic and placed it carefully in her bag. "We need to keep moving. The longer we stay here, the more likely they'll find us. We're not safe yet." Jake stood up too, his body still stiff but stronger than before. "Lead the way," he said. "I'm not going to let anyone come after you again. I'll fight." Maria's eyes softened with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. "You'll need more than just strength, Jake. You'll need to trust me, and trust yourself. This journey will change everything." As they stepped out of the shelter into the open desert, Jake felt a new sense of purpose. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the sand. But as the darkness crept in, there was a strange sense of hope stirring in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, he wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long while, he believed he might just make it through. The desert stretched before them, endless and barren. Jake and Maria walked side by side, the weight of their mission settling in the air between them. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground. But neither of them stopped. There was no time to waste, and they couldn't afford to rest. Jake kept his eyes on the ground, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. His mind was racing, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. A woman from another world. A glowing relic. And now, an enemy that would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. His chest tightened with every thought of what might be waiting for them. He wasn't used to feeling like this, out of his depth, unsure of what to do. Back home, he had always known what came next. Get up, work the land, protect his family. But now, his life had been turned upside down. "I never thought I'd be running across the desert with a stranger," Jake said quietly, breaking the silence. And the voice was hoarse, the words coming out more as a grumble than anything else. "I guess you're not really a stranger, though, huh? You know things about me I can't even explain." Maria glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know everything about you, Jake, but the relic chose you for a reason. I can't explain why. All I know is that we're in this together now." Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to her, though he still had questions. There was something about Maria, her calm, focused demeanor, that made him feel like he wasn't completely alone anymore. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She didn't seem afraid of what lay ahead. And even though they were both carrying burdens they couldn't fully understand, there was a quiet strength in her that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. "So where exactly are we headed?" Jake asked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Maria hesitated, glancing at the horizon. "There's a place up ahead, a small outpost. We can get supplies there. We need to keep moving before the enemy catches up." Jake nodded. His eyes followed her gaze, watching the flat landscape ahead. It didn't look like much, just a distant blur on the edge of the earth. But he trusted her instincts. She had already proven that she knew what she was doing, and at this point, he had no choice but to follow her lead. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness. The heat of the day was starting to fade, but the air was still dry and Jake's throat felt like it was made of sandpaper. As they approached the outpost, Jake could see the outline of a few small buildings in the distance. There was a rusted windmill turning slowly in the breeze, and the place looked abandoned, its wooden structures weathered and worn by time. Maria slowed her pace as they neared, her hand resting on the strange device at her side. Jake glanced at her, noticing the way her fingers were twitching, like she was expecting something to happen. Jake asked, his voice low. Maria didn't answer right away. She stopped a few steps ahead of him and surveyed the area. Her sharp eyes seemed to be scanning every corner, every shadow. After a moment, she nodded. We should be all right. But stay alert. Jake instinctively reached for the revolver at his side. His hands were still stiff from the fight, but he had learned long ago that it was better to be prepared than caught off guard. They approached the first of the crumbling buildings, the door hanging slightly off its hinges. Maria pushed it open carefully, the creaking sound echoing in the quiet. Jake followed closely behind, his senses heightened, his every step careful. The interior was dark, save for the faint light coming through cracks in the walls. The air inside was stale, and the faint smell of old wood and dust hung in the air. It looked like no one had lived here for years. Let's find what we need and get out of here, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded. As they moved deeper into the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. There was something about this place, something off. His instincts told him to be cautious, but he didn't want to voice his unease. He had no reason to doubt Maria, not yet. They found a small storage room in the back, filled with crates and barrels. Jake immediately began rummaging through the supplies, looking for anything useful, water, food, anything that might help them along the way. He found a few cans of beans and some dried jerky, along with a few bottles of water. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. Maria was looking at something in the corner of the room, a dusty old chest that had been shoved aside. She knelt down, running her fingers over the rusted lock. After a moment, she stood up and motioned for Jake to come over. "This," she said, her voice tense, "might help us." Jake stepped closer and saw what she was holding. A set of old maps, their edges frayed and faded with age. The maps were marked with strange symbols, lines that didn't make sense to him. But Maria seemed to recognize them immediately. "This is where we need to go," she said, holding up the map. "It's a hidden location, somewhere the enemy doesn't know about. We can make it there before they catch up." Jake studied the map, trying to understand what he was seeing, but the symbols and markings didn't mean anything to him. Still, he trusted Maria's judgment. She seemed certain. "If this is the safest place to go, then that's where we'll head," Jake said, taking the map from her and tucking it into his bag. They spent a few more minutes gathering what supplies they could find before heading back outside. The air had cooled slightly, but the wind was picking up, carrying with it the scent of something unfamiliar. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. As they started to walk toward the next stretch of desert, Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He turned his head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of what was making him so uneasy. But there was nothing, just the empty expanse of sand and sky. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jake asked, his voice barely more than a murmur. Maria glanced at him, her eyes hardening. "Yes, we're not alone. But we don't have time to worry about it now." Jake swallowed, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had no idea what kind of enemies they were facing, but he had a feeling they were about to find out. As they continued walking, the silence between them grew heavier. Jake's thoughts drifted to the journey ahead, to the dangers that awaited them. But he couldn't deny the bond that was forming between him and Maria. They were unlikely allies, thrown together by chance, but together nonetheless. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he wasn't facing the world alone. But deep down, he knew that the hardest part of their journey was yet to come. The relic, the enemies, and the mystery surrounding Mariah's mission. Everything was leading up to something bigger than either of them could imagine. And Jake was beginning to realize that he might have just stepped into a world that he wasn't prepared for, but there was no turning back now. The wind howled across the desert, biting and cold. It swept the dust and swirling clouds around Jake and Maria as they trudged forward, the weight of their journey heavy on their shoulders. Every step felt like a test, and Jake could feel the tension rising between them. There was no turning back now. Whatever came next, they would face it together. For the last few days, they had been moving without rest, pushing forward with little more than the water and supplies they had found in the old outpost. The heat of the day had given way to a chilling cold as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, but neither of them had stopped. They couldn't afford to. The enemy was closing in, and Jake could feel the pressure mounting with every mile. Maria's pace was steady, but there was an unmistakable tension in her movements. Her eyes flickered constantly to the horizon, scanning the empty expanse, ever watchful, ever alert. She had said little since they left the outpost. her mind clearly preoccupied with the task ahead. Jake couldn't blame her. They were being hunted, and with every step they took, they were drawing closer to a showdown they weren't sure they were ready for. "How much farther?" Jake asked, his voice breaking the silence. Maria didn't look at him, but kept her eyes fixed ahead. "Not far now. We should reach the hidden place by dawn." Jake nodded, but the unease in his stomach only deepened. He had been running on pure instinct for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be in control. Every decision had been made for him, by the relic, by Maria, and now by the invisible forces chasing them. It was hard to shake the feeling that he had no say in any of it, that he was just a pawn in a game far bigger than himself. They kept walking, the desert stretching endlessly before them, but then a sound reached Jake's ears. It was distant at first, like the rumble of thunder, but as it grew louder, he realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of engines that weren't supposed to be here. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He turned to Maria. "We're not alone." Maria's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. "They've found us." "No," she said firmly. "We can't fight them like this." "Not yet." They both turned toward the sound, which was growing louder with every passing second. It was coming from behind them, from the direction they had just traveled. Jake could see the faint outline of vehicles moving across the dunes, their headlights cutting through the darkness like a pair of searching eyes. There were at least 3 of them. No, 4. And they were closing in fast. Jake's pulse quickened. "We need to run. We don't have time. We have to make a stand here." Jake didn't want to argue. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep running anyway. His legs were sore, and the desert had drained him of everything. But he didn't want to die here. Not like this, without a chance to fight back. He glanced over at Maria, his mind racing. She seemed to know what he was thinking. Her gaze softened, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of something other than resolve in her eyes. Something that felt almost human. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but filled with something Jake couldn't quite place. "You don't have to do this." "I don't have a choice." The vehicles were almost upon them now, their headlights illuminating the darkness like twin suns. Jake could see figures in the vehicles, silhouettes moving inside, their faces hidden by the glare. They were too close to escape, and as much as Jake wanted to run, he knew there was nowhere to hide. Maria didn't move, though. She just stood there, her hand resting on the strange relic at her side, her gaze locked on the approaching vehicles. Jake's instincts told him to take cover, to shoot if necessary, but Maria was different. She was waiting for something. Waiting for the right moment. He didn't know what that moment was, but he had to trust her. "Get ready," Maria whispered. Jake clenched his jaw, his fingers tight around the grip of his gun. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. He had made his choice. He was in this, no matter what came next. The first vehicle crested the top of a dune, and in an instant it was upon them. Jake saw the glint of metal and the harsh, unforgiving faces of the men inside. They were here for the relic. They were here for Maria. Without a word, the men in the vehicle raised their weapons, their intentions clear. But before they could fire, Maria stepped forward, her hand outstretched. The relic in her grip began to pulse with an eerie light, brighter than it had ever been before. Jake felt a strange force in the air, like the very atmosphere was thickening, shifting around them. Maria's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "You're too late." The ground beneath them seemed to rumble as the relic's light flared. Jake watched in awe and disbelief as the vehicle suddenly came to a halt, as if some invisible force had stopped them in their tracks. The men inside looked bewildered, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. And then, as quickly as it had started, the force of the relic vanished. The vehicles lurched forward again, but now the men were retreating, scrambling to move out of the way. Jake didn't know how Maria had done it, but he didn't care. It worked. For a moment, there was silence. The men in the vehicles were watching them, still unsure of what had just happened, and Maria stood there, her hand still holding the relic, her expression unreadable. Jake could see the toll it had taken on her. She was drained, her breathing shallow, as if the power she had just unleashed had cost her more than she was willing to give. "Let's go," she said, her voice low, barely more than a whisper, "while we still can." Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The danger hadn't passed, he knew that much. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid. The choice had been made. They had taken a stand, and they had survived. For better or worse, he was in this to the end. Together they walked into the darkness, with the remnants of their enemies in the distance, knowing that the hardest part of their journey had just begun. The road ahead was unknown. filled with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. They might just make it after all.